Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast Leader Study Series. I'm Natasha, a leader development professional, and I would say that leadership is my passion. I love leading and supporting leaders in their leadership journey.
And I'm Corey, a program manager, emerging leader, and overall leadership enthusiast.
In this Leader Study Series, we're going through the 7 episodes of the 2011 sci-fi show Terra Nova. For each episode, we will deconstruct the leaders and decisions of the characters on the show. Leadership is demonstrated in many different ways, and we're looking forward to talking about the actions, responses, and opportunities to show up as a leader.
Terra Nova aired in 2011, so there will be spoilers in these episodes. Throughout the episodes, we'll talk about emotional intelligence, difficult conversations, building and maintaining trust, and more. Let's jump in.
Okay, so we are back, still in the season of Terra Nova, and we're in the 6th episode called Nightfall. And I really loved this episode because I thought there were a lot of different ways that the team was working together that we haven't seen yet. But I will pass it over to you to get us started. What stood out to you?
I think what was interesting was we had one right we had a meteor that came in, knocked out all the power. And what I thought was really interesting was, like you were saying, we had all of the team. They were all affected by the same problem, but it affected all of them differently. And that was what I thought was so interesting, was it was one issue that affected the group as a whole, and then it affected each sort of individual in their own role. So that was, I think, the thing that stood out to me the most off the bat, because you also got to see people prioritizing the organization as a whole from a leadership position, and then the impact for their individual sort of section or unit within the greater organization. So that was something that I think was stuck out to me.
And I think so. We can just kind of go in and start to break it down. So one of the newer configurations was Elizabeth and Sky having to work together, and they were trying to save Hunter from a parasite. But it
Yeah.
was really interesting because you have these two people who obviously leaders, obviously, and have shown great leadership in a lot of different ways throughout the season so far. And now you have them come together, which we haven't seen them come together before either. And what was so interesting was that even though they're both strong leaders, they managed to have this amazing co-leadership relationship where they were each able to express their ideas and their thoughts. No one was steamrolling the other. And it was actually because of their differences in background that actually made what they were working on successful.
I The other thing about that was the sort of progression of that issue, right? That
Mhm.
was, I think, also so interesting, because it was initially like not a big deal, right? Because I think it was like a home brew or something, some ancient alcohol recipe. Okay, felt sick, wasn't great. Very standard sort of like, you shouldn't do that, that sort of thing. And then as, they continued with testing and the progress, some parasite, weren't sure what it potentially was, that the complexity of that issue grew, but it didn't affect their that co-leadership function, right? If anything, they became more cooperative as the issue progressed to be a bigger problem, because I think they both understood, like you said, they had differences, but those differences together created a much stronger approach to, solving that problem. And then couple that with that loss of power that was created by, so it's just like I said, that issue kept compounding and it got more and more complex, but they didn't just like, they were persistent in that like leadership function and solving that problem even as the problem grew larger. It wasn't like they're like, oh, this is too big now, we can't handle this. It was a continued take it as it came and adapting. And one of the things that sticks out to me about that as well is that's how I view agile management. And a lot of times people look at agile as being like, oh, you just do things in 2 week sprints, and it's, or like that means things can change all the time and it's no big deal because we're agile. No, what that means is we still have a goal, right? In this case, it's medical, get the patient healthy. What agile means is as new information comes in, as the situation grows or shrinks in complexity, you leverage resources to appropriately match that to meet the end state at the determined time, right? So that was, I think, a great sort of that was great agile management and leadership, in my opinion.
I love that you brought up the agile piece because I think that a lot of times people they get so caught up in something needing to be a process. And a lot of people, when they think process, they think checkbox, like let me do these different things. And it's like you said, this is a structure to help guide you through. It is not this oppressive system that leads you to get to a certain outcome a certain way. That ability to be agile, to be adaptive. And have you, in your experience, have you seen something like what Elizabeth and Sky were playing out? Like you mentioned it really well a few minutes ago, where you said, as it got more complex, they became more cohesive. Have you seen that in real life outside of a beautifully written television script?
Uh, Rarely, but yes. And a lot of those times, what I think is the most interesting is I do not how do I say this without sounding arrogant? No way. So we'll just go with it. It's not the senior leaders that do that effectively. Normally, it's if we're looking at it in an agile or a scrum perspective, normally it's a scrum team that's really good at that. And I think that leaders get too caught up in all of those components that they can't do it effectively. But yeah, it's there's a lot of cases where you know there's a shift. The team rallies much better than the leadership does because the leadership sort of goes into this damage control panic mode, and in some ways that's their role, right? And a lot of times scrum masters, I think, not to turn this into an whole agile thing, but like I think scrum masters especially sometimes take that protect the team mentality maybe a little bit too far and get way offensively defensive is what I like to say, right? Of um this isn't going well, it got more complex, we're not going to meet our burn down, we're not going to this, that, and the other thing. And they start to try to come up with these excuses when they don't just go to the team and be like, is this too much? Are we going to be able to do it or not? They just immediately assume the worst and go that way. And that's something that I struggled with a lot too when I first started doing Scrum as a Scrum Master was protect the team at all costs. So it was, yeah, but very rarely. Have you ever run into cases where you see folks, sort of rallying like that effectively?
Have kind of similar to you a few times. I don't see it as often. In fact, what I do see more often is what you were just talking about, where I see more senior people who maybe it's to protect the team, maybe it's to protect the business or whatever they're thinking, but the actual people who are executing it are way more cohesive, way more like they know how to drive it forward. And I see a lot of more senior people maybe getting in the way of that in a lot of ways. And yeah, trying to like, oh, well, let's do this damage control. And the people on the team are like, there's no damage, there's nothing to control. We already have the solution. So yeah, so I guess I should say that maybe I've seen it maybe 50-50, where I don't see it with more senior people, but I do see it with more junior people. And I just mean that in like a hierarchical organization. I don't mean by experience or anything, but people who are doing the hands-on work, they know what they're doing. They know how to fix something that's broke. Like they know how to keep this machine moving forward. Whereas I think that once you get, oh, this is going to sound terrible. But here it goes. I think sometimes people get into, once you get into more what people are calling strategic leadership, you forget that it's like people know how to do what they're doing and they know how to do it well. And your strategy is great. And you need to keep that ship moving forward, kind of like you were saying with the whole process of the agile method and all of that. Like, let's keep this moving forward. But those people, they know what to do. They know how to collaborate. They know how to connect. And so, yeah, so I would say that as far as like the Elizabeth and Sky situation, I have had the opportunity to see very different types of people, like with just very different types of skill sets come together and make something that you're like, they couldn't have done it on their own, but it was the genius of the two combined that actually made it super impactful and super effective.
Yeah, something else, talk about you brought up the point about like, the core kind of competencies that people have and they know what their job is, they know how to do it. Sometimes you just got to get out of their way. Is, again, premise of a TV show, you look at Elizabeth and that the medical staff there, they've got crazy holographic robots, different, custom build push out a pill machine type things. um, they lose electricity, they lose all of those advanced technologies and capabilities. But Elizabeth as a doctor, what does she end up doing? The old fashioned, cuts open surgery, yanks the worm out of him type thing. So it's like, I think that that's something else too. Obviously, it's a bit extreme, and it's also a medical situation. But it's like, um, I think that sometimes there's such a reliance or expectation on uh, a dashboard, a widget, a some sort of automation process that, like, if that fails, like, oh, this whole industry is going to fail, right? Like, oh, uh, timesheets are down. How are we going to track time for everybody? Well, we're never going to be able to. Or people could just write down the hours that they worked on a sticky note and put it in when that's done. It's no less accurate. So, uh, freaking out over nothing. Okay, yeah, situation is bad right now. That's down. This is a very easy thing that people have done for a long time before computers were ever a thing. So, um, I thought that that was a great sort of highlight too, where she had a good enough understanding of what the root problem was and remembered her sort of, again, it's medical, so it's sort of a bad analogy, but she knew her base training, right? She knew her base anatomy and was able to flawlessly continue down like like it didn't really matter. And I think that that's something that gets lost a lot of time in leadership too, is that reliance on a system that reports up or reports down, and we've got to keep everybody in the loop and transparency. Okay, if that's not the case for a week or two, it's really not the end of the world.
Yes, completely agree. And it's interesting, excuse me, because yeah, like again, people are smart. They know what they're doing. They know what they were trained to do. And even if people have a lot of these other things, right? This technology, dashboards, whatever it is that is helping to automate some of their tasks, it doesn't mean that they can't go back to the core of, I like the example you said with the timesheet, because I was also thinking people are like, how are we going to get attendance? I'm going to count the people in the room.
Yeah,
I'm gonna write down their names. And on the back end, we'll put it in somewhere. Maybe we create something like it's going to get done because it is part of the function of what people are doing. But again, I think that sometimes, like we were already talking about, maybe it's because some people don't see how they would do it, that they forget that it's like, but this is these people's job. This is
yeah,
what they do. Elizabeth is a doctor. So the technology is great and it makes her life easier. It makes healing the healing process for the patient better. That doesn't mean if those things aren't there that she's not still a doctor.
yeah. It's funny because I think we're taught very early on as kids, uh, show your work, right? In math class, like, yeah, we all like to joke like, oh yeah, it's got my cell phone now, and teacher said I was never gonna have a calculator in my pocket all the time. But that's something that I think is instilled. Like, you have to understand the basics and how to do things and the functions, and then there are tools that make that a lot easier. But if those tools go away, those functions still need to take place, and it's important to be able to understand that. So, the depth of knowledge on something, I think that that's why you, like you said, you hire these people, because they understand that. You as a leader, you don't have to understand every in and out of an HR function or of timekeeping and accounting systems, because you have that skill available to you, and you need to let them work, right? As the kids say, let the man cook. So, um, I think that's yeah, that's something that I think people forget about a lot. They just go in that panic mode.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
But
Okay.
oh,
Oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No,
I was
you
gonna
go.
I was gonna say, oh, thank you. I was gonna say on what I also think is interesting is we go on the larger scale now, and the organization itself losing power. Um, that whole dinosaur and Sixers, obviously, as we find out in this, it was a defense mechanism starts to fail because both
Mhm.
their perimeter security as well as a lot of their weapons and surveillance equipment and everything is all electronic in some way. And so what I think is sort of interesting there is um you have this issue going on in the medical sector, right, in that building, and then you have Elizabeth and everyone else, they're dealing with their stuff. And then you go out to the greater thing, you have Commander Taylor who's now worrying about the security of the overall border. All of these things layer and everyone's sort of focused on that key zone. And I think that, Commander Taylor has a lot of really great points of um he's prioritizing very quickly to triage what is this first issue, where do I send those resources, and he's doing that up instantly, instinctively. And I think that's that piece that speaks to both experience and training, that he's able to do that so effectively. But I thought he made just a lot of really cool sort of calls and decisions that you got to see in this episode.
Yes, completely agree. And yeah, that's actually where I did want to shift to next was Taylor and how he was really approaching this. I think there's also kind of a bridge from what we were talking about with Elizabeth and Sky to Taylor and the colony, and also his interactions with the Sixers in this one, where there's also this element of, yes, you need to show your work, you need to know how to do your job, but also the training that different people get is different, obviously. But I mean, like here we have these extreme examples, right? We have a doctor, we have a military person, like very different. But I think there's also this aspect of like the way that people learn, having the basic skills of knowing how you learn and how to learn is what made them successful in their own areas. So that then when other things happen, I still know how to adapt. I still know how to learn. I still know these basic things and can still move forward. And yeah, Taylor demonstrated that. I'm a big Taylor fan. So he
Yeah.
demonstrated that in a lot of ways in this episode with him had like it's his job, like he's the leader, he has to think about every person, every resource, every building, like he's got that sheet of things that he needs to look out for that are his responsibility. And you can tell that he's also a leader who that's very, it's also a point of pride for him where it's like he does that not just because he's the leader, but he does it because he genuinely understands and cares about this mission and these people getting to that end state of where they're trying to get to, building this, utopian society. So yeah, so the way that he was prioritizing, and I think there's also that other piece where when you see great leaders, I get so inspired, but when you see great leaders who are just like, it's amazing when you see somebody who knows their stuff and knows their organization, and yes, like takes in the input from other people, right? He listens to everybody. He listens to Jim, he listens to Elizabeth, like he listens to everybody. And Lieutenant Washington, so he's listening to all of them, and he's still the decider. He still understands that what people need is not an advising board. They don't need a working group. They don't need all of this plan. What they need is action, and they
Yep.
need a decision from you. And I think that that's where Taylor is so strong as a leader. Many great leadership skills, but I think that that is like his strongest thing, where he's like, got it, and this is the decision. And we've seen that before, where even if it's like maybe the wrong decision, a decision needs to be made.
Yeah. The two big things that also stuck out to me with Commander Taylor this time around is one that we've talked about before, both, talking about Z Nation and then just in general, was, meeting he consistently meets like aggression with aggression, or he meets people on an even plane. And that was like, they go low, you go high, and we've talked about that, or like that sort of pieces in the past when the Sixers have shown up, he meets them with the same level of professionalism that the Sixers bring to him, right? So it's like that golden rule almost type attitude. The Sixers come out at them very aggressively, and he meets that aggression, right? Offensively, they're coming into an attack. He's coming into a defend, and he's defending with the same force for which he's receiving. Which
Yeah.
I think that's something that's really interesting. And then I think the other piece is
Real quick, can I say something about that?
Yes, go ahead.
I think, like you mentioned, there's that, that saying that like, oh, they go low, we go high. But I think that Commander Taylor is such a great demonstration of like, they go low and we go toe to toe. Like,
Yes,
that's where I need to
exactly.
be.
Yep.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, sorry. Go
And
ahead with your next point.
no, yeah, that's I appreciate you clarifying because that's the key point that I wanted to make is he consistently meets people at the same sort of level for which they're coming at him, right? You want to come in and negotiate and be respectful. He meets that respect, right? It's like for like. They come in very aggressively. He goes at them aggressively. So, and I think that's a great standard to set because especially when you talk about within an organization, because then that lets me know as not as a leader, but as an employee, if I go to a leader with a problem and they fly off the handle or they get super anxious or worried or scared, like I, I'm not going to go to them with problems anymore because I try to go to them like, hey, look, here's the issue, here's these things. If they're not coming at me like that, then why would I go to them with any issues anymore? Same thing if I go to them angry and they come back at me angry, maybe I shouldn't go to them angry. Like it's
Mhm.
I don't know, it's you if you're consistent in how you respond um to the inputs you're getting. I think there's a lot of power in that. So,
Agreed. And I think with that too, it's that strong emotional intelligence, right? So in emotional intelligence, there's these four pillars. So there's the self-awareness, but then you get to this other awareness where it's like, what does this situation actually need? Like if I'm going at things angry, I probably don't have a lot of self-regulation techniques in place.
yeah.
But if I can read a situation and he doesn't even go at things angry, he just meets it with the same level of energy and aggression that is coming, like you said, that's coming from the other side. So I think it's also just a good demonstration of good emotional intelligence.
Yeah, so Commander Taylor's meeting like for like, that's one big thing. And the other piece is again, sort of an agile management thing. As new information comes in, he doesn't necessarily change directions. He doesn't do a 180. He starts to list that way, right? So they continue on a path. So as new information comes in, for um what with the dinosaur piece, when they realize like the dinosaur has been shot by all the arrows and everything, and he's like they're trying to protect the perimeter. He assesses that, looks at it, he goes, they're already inside, right? He looks at that, he goes, they're already inside. So he immediately shifts that focus sort of to say we're still doing the same thing, we still need to protect, but now our zone is now bigger, right? Because now we have to look internally as well as externally. So we've had an issue. We want to stop any more people from getting in, but now we also need to look internal and clear those people out. So it's just that very quick making those decisions, and I think that's something that he has just a great skill for. Um, and it just reminds me very much of in a business world data breaches, right?
Mhm.
That's something that I think a lot of people don't deal with. A lot of industries don't deal with well, right? It's we've had a data breach and people freeze. What does that mean? What do we lose? Is this money? Is this how do we keep the press away? Like that sort of thing. Like they don't respond well to let's resecure our perimeter. Let's see what the breach was and treat it like that. There's like this frozen panic that you see time and time again, even from like large technology companies too, which is the scary part. So
Yeah. And there's also, I like that you mentioned that piece, like if we're using the example of the data breach where it's like they also as a like I have to do something. I
yep,
don't have any information yet, but I have to do something, whoever they're reporting to. I understand there are boards, I understand there are other people involved. Totally get it. But then what they'll do is they will put this aggressive, oppressive rules or standards on the people in the organization. The data breach was probably one person, right? But now everybody across, this organization is now feeling that. And then they're going to feel a certain way, which if we then look at the example from Terra Nova, if you're going to treat the people on your team like they're the enemy, they're not going to act like the enemy because most people are not like that. But that's going to hurt the trust that you have with them. So, yeah, somebody did breach. That is the person we will deal with. And that person does deserve to have to answer for their actions. Everybody does.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, I've also seen that where they're like, well, let's just put like all these like lockdown measures in. And it's like, well, now I can't do my job effectively. Now I can't get information, and you still expect me to perform the same way during your little panic episode, which had nothing to do with me, right? So I think a lot of times when leaders, when they look at that type of thing, they're just thinking, I need to do something on paper so that it looks like I am helping this situation, when in reality, it's probably making a lot of other things worse versus just being like you said, all right, let's re-secure the perimeter. Let's figure out what the problem is inside. This is what we have to protect. Then we can work outside.
Yeah. I often think about, it's such a great point too, because there's also this like knee-jerk overreaction before you have any of the information. So it's like, oh, we had a data breach. Everybody has to change all their passwords for everything and make it 36 characters with, at least 4 hieroglyphics and 6 dead language words. Like they do all these crazy things, and then does anybody stop and say, were any of our passwords hacked? Right? Was that list exposed? Well, we don't know, so we need to make sure. We got to do it anyway. Or you can't use any peripherals like monitors or something that you bought. You have to use only these approved list ones that we purchased from this supply vendor. Did somebody get hacked through their monitor? Like there's people just start to overreact to these things, and like you said, they create this oppressive environment. When it's just a port left open, some server admin forgot to configure something, so it's an easy fix. It's just, yeah, that stuff kind of blows my mind. But yeah,
Well, and I think with,
go ahead.
oh, go ahead.
Nope, go ahead. I got to go last time.
I think with that also, we heard this a lot, like when we were both heavy into the technology side, and I know you still do work in the technology side, but there's a piece that it's like across all things that we think about as leaders, there is access and there is security, right? So more of one means less of the other. That's just how that works. So there's this trust, there's this level of trust, once again, that has to come into play of how do I balance those two so that people know that I do trust them to do their jobs, but enough in play where it's like, but if you're doing the wrong thing, you're going to be caught, right? Like, and not to make people scared, but to be like, do the right thing. Don't sell our information to other companies. That feels pretty standard, but maybe, it needs to be said. But, so I think that as leaders, though, if we look across all things, not just like a data breach or something, but it's like access and security to anything, those are two levers that have multiple places. And so you have to really find the right configuration for your organization and the people in it so they can be effective while still protecting your organization.
Yeah, it's such a good point, because when we're looking at like this episode of Terra Nova too, when you talk about the security versus access piece, Commander Taylor tends to be a pretty understanding person. Like people are allowed to come into Terra Nova. Like you look at that lost girl earlier on, you look at a few other folks, you look at even when they had the sort of the murder thing, and you're going to be kicked out until we can prove otherwise. His rules are pretty well set, but the Sixers is something that you can't, that level of violence or aggression or that breach of trust and security of humanity. There's all the planning in the world, you can't negate that, right? Because they're not focused on doing anything constructive. They're focused solely on being destructive. So in the attempt to protect against every eventuality or situation that they could come up with, you will not be able to run effectively as an organization. So, and I think Commander Taylor does a really good job of understanding what that risk is, accepting that risk, and moving forward. And that's, again, that's that analysis by paralysis that we've talked about before, where I think you have some leaders, the fear of failure, the fear of issues, they get so caught up in trying to prevent or plan for every one of those eventualities that they get absolutely nothing done, right? Well, what if it upsets this executive? Okay, then it upsets them. But why are we going to sit here and try to analyze and ask everyone that's ever worked with them what they like or don't like? It's crazy, crazy. I run into that a lot with government work, right? Well, what if this upsets this director or this chief or something? We don't want to upset them. Why not? You know?
Well, and is it our job to make people happy? Are we clowns, or are
Yeah.
we like professionals? Are we leaders? Are we these other things? So, yeah, absolutely. And I think what what Commander Taylor does is he manages the Sixers in a very intelligent way without painting with a broad brush. Kind of like you were saying, where it's like he could be like, no Sixers allowed in here ever. We're not talking to them. They're dead to us. Like he could absolutely do that because that would be the easier thing. However, that's another component of leadership where it's like, it's also your job to manage these relationships. It's your job to, especially if it could impact your colony or your organization, which the Sixers obviously can. So him also, opening up for those conversations, kind of letting those different things happen. It's giving him more information about them. And it's also him not just shutting everything down, which I think maybe that's kind of something a more immature leader would do. And I don't mean immature. I just mean like unexperienced, having to learn that it's like there is a lot you have to manage and a lot you have to balance as a leader. And those relationships that you don't like are certainly some of them. I know I personally experience that pretty regularly. There are some stakeholders who are just more complex than others in that they don't know how to be good partners. Right? They more have a demanding, you're going to do what I say or else type of thing, when it's like, so could I say like, oh, we're not working with them? Like we're not going to do anything, with our program for them? Absolutely not. For me, at least in my situation, it's like, this isn't about me. This isn't about my program. It's about them. They're essentially the customer when they're ready to be good partners. I am here for you. Until that point, though, there can't be this one person taking advantage of another group type of thing. And so I see that also with, not that I am Commander Taylor. Commander Natasha is what I prefer to be called.
We are all Commander Taylor.
But it's that element of, again, balance. And I know we joke about the word balance a lot, but it is actually pretty accurate.
I brought down, I had like a wild thought hypothetical for
Yeah.
you. So when we're talking about, um, sorry, I have arrows and everything and I can't read my handwriting. So let me consolidate my thoughts here. So we're talking about shutting down, right? Preparing for every eventuality, not being like when you talk about the Sixers, right? Being very stern, where there's that flex there about he doesn't say no Sixers coming in. Do you think change management comes into play there at all? Like from the perspective of if you are so rigid that you don't give people the opportunity to change or grow or develop because you've set such strict parameters. And I guess maybe change management isn't the whole way about it, but like you never give someone the opportunity if they make a mistake or do something wrong, like there's no, right, you can't come back from it. So like why you almost kill innovation because you punish somebody taking risks so much. Like obviously there's lines to that too, right? Well, I thought maybe if I murdered him, life would be okay. Like probably not a forgivable gray area, but I just like, what are your thoughts on that convoluted
Yeah.
mess?
Well, first, I think everything is change management. Just because the environment that we work in, that we live in, we do have to be kind of agents of change management consistently. And yes, I agree that like we have to give people the space to change and accept that they can change while also protecting the organization and the team. Right. So, for example, I'm currently working with someone who has expressed that they're very interested in changing. they've been given feedback to change the specific areas of change that need to occur. If this person were to make even one of those changes, I think that it's not really micromanagement, but the level of monitoring would probably lessen, because then it's like, you heard the feedback, you heard what it's like to work back and forth, willing to let bygones be bygones, because sometimes some people need more explicit instruction than others.
Yeah.
I think some people you can just be like, what if we did this? And they'll go build an entire program around it with measures and content and all this stuff. And then other people, you have to be like, on this day at this time, you need to report, you need to do this, have this report to me for this, so there's that. So if a person, I think that, yeah, you do need to let people have the space to change, but they also have to be making that effort to demonstrate that for others, right? Just like you on your end, when they show that change, you demonstrate to them that we're loosening this up. Because yeah, if you always remind people of their past, you're not letting them grow either, and you're holding them to this one place in history. When in reality, it's like, yeah, if you held me to the leadership decisions I made at 19, I should never work again. Like it's you know what I mean? Like it's just like,
Yeah.
it's so people, you have to give them that space. So yeah, so I would say there, to pull that together back with like the change management, also your organization changes, right? And so maybe even somebody who was great and really was delivering on something, maybe you just don't need that delivered anymore. So you also have to be willing to be like, oh, there's this shift. And not because it's just all about the business, but ultimately it's that business that's keeping people in jobs and, delivering to the customer what the customer wants. So yeah, so I would say change management is in all of it. And yes, you should definitely give people the opportunity to change. And when they show you they have, you got to let the past go. Except in your example, if someone has been murdered. I would probably hold them at arm's distance forever.
Murder. Sorry. The only this was I think this was a fun episode just as a television show. A lot of good action and drama. I enjoyed it. It was probably my favorite episode so far, for that perspective. But towards the end of the episode, like cut to the next day, people are rebuilding, things are coming back to normal. Again, when we talk about like resource management or people management, Commander Taylor has people assigned to do certain things. You're rebuilding the fence, you're putting the market back together, you're checking to make sure bumps and bruises are only that and nobody's like hemorrhaging out internally, like kind of that kind of stuff. And what I think is great is he starts to do that after action review, right? Like this situation happened, he starts to game plan through that, and he starts to identify things, which one he's able to do because he doesn't have to micromanage. He has the right people doing the right jobs as far as rebuilding the walls and that kind of stuff. But what I think is so great, excuse me, about him as a character is he identifies like the Sixers knew exactly where to go, because the box. Sorry, we didn't talk about the box at all, but like that box that they found a few episodes ago that people wanted, that they couldn't figure out how to open. And earlier on in the episode, they were discussing like, oh, it's like got biometric markers and can only be opened by certain people and things like that. The Sixers knew right where to go to get that box, and he is able to look at that and say they were very strategic and tactical in their approach to get there. They got the box, they got out. That was their main goal this whole time. And he's, sort of starts to identify, we have a spy, right? And that's something that he's been thinking about for a while. And a lot of people in the episode, or excuse me, a lot of people in the show were kind of like, are they the spy? Is he the spy? Is that a spy? But that mindset, I think what is also interesting about Commander Taylor is he puts that trust, he accepts that as being a risk, like we talked about earlier. It doesn't consume him, and it doesn't consume to the point of hindering their day-to-day operations. And think about that data breach piece again, or that will they, won't they hostile takeover for a company or gossip. He doesn't allow that to be a problem, right? There has to be enough evidence to prove the point before we accept that as an issue. Otherwise, it's just a possibility. And
Yeah.
so I think that that's a really strong uh, leadership quality too.
Absolutely. And it goes back to what you were talking about earlier with I can't plan for every inevitability, but once I have enough evidence that this possibility is now very probable and is likely the best course of action to follow to figure out what's going on, then I'll take action. But otherwise, it's just resource wasting to be like, oh, it could be this thing. Well, based on what? A vibe? Like that's not a business decision. That's a your feelings and that's your opinion based on nothing.
Yep.
And so instead, it's like, yeah, I do have the vibe, right? He did. It was something he suspected. Now I have enough things to put resources behind it. And that's also just like, that's just smart resource management. And that's just smart leadership because
Yeah.
you can't chase everything.
No, that was great. I don't really have too much for else from this episode. Do you?
No, I thought again, it was also one of my favorite episodes just because we saw the cool things they could do with the stuff that they had, the technology and all of that. And then it's like they still performed exceptionally well when those things were taken away.
Yeah.
So, strength of the team.
Awesome.